Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate BAM inviting me. It's been an inspiring morning, and please bear with me. I know it's late in the afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was born in Salt Lake City, but my family moved to Connecticut, and then I was raised in rural Pennsylvania. When it came time to going to school, to college, I decided I wanted to go to an art school rather than a department in a university. And the places I made 3 applications, and one was too close to home, one was too cold in Minnesota, and so I selected the Kansas City Art Institute. And even though that sounds like it was by default, it turned out to be the best choice I possibly could have made. When I started my art education, I was sure I was going to be a painter. I was a lousy painter. My freshman foundation studies really opened my eyes to a lot of different medias and approaches to work, and in the end, I majored in sculpture and minored in drawing. There are 2 highlights of my undergraduate studies. One was traveling to California for the first time with a small group of friends to attend an international fiber symposium. A one-person exhibition of a fiber artist named Magdalena Bekanovich really changed my whole perception of what sculpture could be. The other key point of my college education was my junior year. I was granted a study abroad opportunity, and my mentor, Willem Volkers, was teaching at Leeds College of Art at the time on a professor exchange and invited me to come stay with his family. I was further able to develop an opportunity to work along art students at Leeds Polytechnic for a semester, so I feel a little bit like I'm coming back to home. Thank you for that. After I received my BFA, I couldn't afford graduate school, so decided to move to Los Angeles. Oh, Magdalena, sorry, Magdalena. Okay. To move to Los Angeles to immerse myself in an art community. If I wasn't going to go to school, I just wanted to be in an art community, and I figured Los Angeles was warmer than New York. So a lot of my choices seem like they're default, but I just think it was divine intervention. I had 2 opportunities while in California. I had 2 opportunities to develop, to work with investors to help them develop art galleries, and did a lot of work curating and developing galleries that dealt with fiber ceramics and glass, so the contemporary crafts. While working in the galleries, I became aware that many artists didn't really know how to promote themselves and started teaching workshops and professional development for artists within the UC California system. Bear in mind, this was the late 70s and before internet. Another responsibility I had as a gallery director was helping to initiate and administer corporate commissions for gallery artists. At the time, I didn't realize how much this was really going to benefit my own career as things developed. At a certain point in time, though, I realized I'd gotten so involved with arts administration that I'd abandoned my art making. So I decided to go to graduate school. Let's see what's next. I needed to work full-time when going to school. I didn't really get along with the chairman. So there came a point in time where we decided to come to an agreement. I'd give him a thesis show, and he'd give me my MA. At that point, I also had left the other galleries, but I decided, oh, I'll open my own gallery. It was very experimental, very exciting, well received, but I really didn't have a financial plan, and I would not recommend that. Shortly after my gallery closed, I received an invitation to return to the Kansas City Art Institute to teach a 6-week workshop at the foundation program as a visiting artist. It was a perfect time to reconsider a major life transition. I packed everything in storage and went off to see what would happen. I enjoyed teaching, I started new work, I renewed friendships, and decided to move back to Kansas City. There were no teaching positions, and I was pretty well centered around the Art Institute, and there were no teaching positions available, so I applied for Director of Admissions. I didn't receive that, but I was hired as the Director of Alumni alumni relations and career development, and then that position transitioned into a full-time director of career services and then full-time director of continuing education. But once again, I realized that art administration had gotten in the way of my art making and decided I needed to make another change. On the bright side, when I was a visiting artist, I met Martin. Eventually we got married, and I assumed we stayed in Kansas City because his family lived there, but it turned out he wanted to see what he could do in a different location, and he accepted a job in Nashville. So we were moving to Nashville, and I said, if we're moving for your job, I want to move there for mine as well. And I developed a 5-year plan where I would do everything possible to establish myself as a professional, self-supporting artist. I joined professional organizations, taught at the art college, exhibited regularly because now I finally had a dedicated art practice, and my work was selling. I also started my studio workshops, which I'd now taught for almost 30 consecutive years. At 4 years and 11 months of my 5-year plan, I received my first public art commission. I took that as a sign and haven't looked back. Another agreement Martin and I had made prior to moving to Nashville was that if that move would be his move, and the next move would be mine. One of the things I was doing in this 5-year plan program was working with Russ Faxon, who was a sculptor in Bell Buckle who specialized in monumental figurative bronze sculptures. And he lived in Bell Buckle. And I assisted him on the commission he had to create the Roy Acuff and Minnie Pearl sculptures there at the Ryman Auditorium. He didn't like the girly things, so I got to do the flowers and the ruffles. I kept driving from Nashville, and Nashville was nice. We lived in East Nashville. It was a lovely area. We moved, but driving out to Bell Buckle, it just got prettier. It was an hour drive, and by the time I got to Bell Buckle, the landscape had changed. It was a lot more lovely. And so one day I asked Russ if he knew of any place for sale. He said, well, there's this place for sale on Fairfield Pike, but it's a little ragged. I went to look at it that day for lunch. Was interested because it had this large building on it that immediately said potential studio space. So I invited Martin down on the following Friday, and it was a nice fall day. He rode down on his motorcycle. We ate at the Bell Buckle Cafe. Anyway, he said, if you want to move here, we can consider this. So we met with the realtor the next day, Saturday, put in a bid, and she said, oh no, he'll never accept that. But on Tuesday, he accepted the bid because duck hunting season was coming up, and he wanted to go hunting instead of worry about selling his property. So within a week, we were moving to Bell Buckle without any preconceived notion to see what would happen. And it's been a good move. It's been a great move. We're not moving. Okay, there's 3 categories of work that are produced in my studio in Bell Buckle. Oh, there's a few more. Oh, wait a minute. That was my first commission that I got at 4 years, 11 months. It was for a Welcome Center for the state of Tennessee. And it was very exciting. It was very exciting to get that. That was the first time I really answered a call for RFQs and qualifications and designs. I have 3 categories of work that are produced in my studio: my personal work, my community projects, and my commissioned work. I think I have a few just to see where I live. This was a little house. It did not look like that when they offered to bulldoze it down. Trust me. I love living there. Of course, we have about 14 acres, so I have a vegetable garden. We have animals that are pretty much all abandoned and just show up for us to adopt them. That would be Reggie, the white dog with the spot. The concrete sculpture is a 4-foot Chihuahua, but that's another story. Okay, so my personal work, I'm a collector. Aren't we all? I also am fortunate enough to have plenty of storage space for the things that I collect. Everything that attracts me, from interesting sticks to rusty nails to lamp parts. motivate my own pieces. They come from thinking about the what if in a form and the materials that are available. So these are a series of my personal pieces. I do combine the concrete is often an element. Mosaic is sometimes an element. In my personal work, it's not a driving force. I actually came to mosaics because as I started creating sculptures and wanted to go outside, not just deal with the interior space, I wanted to add color to the surfaces. So mosaic, again, was one of those, I hate to say it, but sort of a default choice, but now I've fully embraced it, and I can't imagine not having it as a continuous option. But this piece has, the ring on top is a concrete piece. This piece is called Bean. I had that stick in my studio for 4 years waiting for the right idea for it. This is called Broken Rainbow. Sometimes I like the idea of installation art. That's one of the things that my eyes were opened up to with the Magdalene Abakonovich exhibition. So for me, the reflections of pieces are often as important as the pieces themselves. These are PC beads, which is not politically correct. It's actually polished concrete, so layers of concrete and rubber. Again, layers of concrete, honed back, integrated colors, and then mosaicing of glass on the inside. This is a piece that combines the modeling of the concrete with Picassiette. She's called Bella Bella. I've got she's about this high, 20 inches, I'm sorry, let's say half a meter. And there'll be more little ladies, and I just picture them all in a room. This is one of my newer totems. I love totems and have done a number of them over the development of my personal work. This piece is called Clowning Around, and it was the idea to try to push the sense of balance. Even though there's a vertical support rod going up the center of these, I wanted it to look a little wonky, like it might fall over at any moment, but trust me, it won't. And of course, someone else mentioned today their love for blackbirds. That's been a reoccurring theme in a lot of my work, both in drawing and sculptures. Of course, crows are fabulous collectors. I'm a collector. They're collectors. At one point in time, I got obsessive about collecting buttons. And so all of these things are things that were found in the button boxes that weren't buttons. So my community art, as Alex said, I'd been doing projects in schools, and I didn't really think of those as community art projects, and then encountered the organization called the Community Build Association, and went to a conference and raised my hand. Ooh, and I ended up being president. But the idea of trying to figure out how you can engage the community to create something that they may not have thought of, encounter a material they've never touched, to work alongside one another and have conversations. This was very important to me. This is part of an installation that I did in a local museum that included a lot of different materials. It was called Recollections, but it was also RE reference collections. So all of the work really was inspired by what occurred during a group collection period at the museum. The important thing for me about this show was that it really focused on not only individuals, but families, the sense of place or home, community, and just that general sense of belonging. And I tried to represent it in a lot of different forms, from basic house forms to the trees, where people created a family tree and a branch, and those branches were put together into a major trunk to create community trees. So the trees populated the whole exhibition. In the back, you'll notice another piece that was called Changing American Family. The idea of this is that the figures were created on rollers so that people could come into the gallery and roll the figures around to create their vision of a family, not one that is commonly thrust upon us in terms of what an appropriate family is. American flag is actually made out of over 16,000 flattened bottle caps that have been pop riveted to panels and is about 2 by 4 meters. So that remains one of my favorite pieces to date. This was another piece for a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to helping teens succeed, whether they were in crisis or wanted to take a leadership role. We had about 150 volunteers on this, and so it involved community participation as well as teaching people how the Mosaic process that would then act as group leaders. A device I frequently use when I'm doing a community project is inviting stakeholders to do a design or create a small mosaic, depending on what the situation is, that can then be incorporated into a larger sculpture. For this particular piece, the area school children's also did a sculpture contest to decide which elements, what sculptures I would actually make. And then we had many, like the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, community groups just drop in and help make the designs and help mosaic the overall sculptures. My commissioned artwork has really become the mainstream of income for my studio practice. Doing commissions certainly isn't for everyone, but I love the interaction with clients. I also love the problem solving that goes along with that. Sometimes there are more problems than you can imagine. Lizzie's full-time residence, and she's Lizzie because she has lavender eyes like Elizabeth Taylor. So you have to have fun with your work. So the problem or the challenge with Lizzie is that she was going to be installed in the 6th floor interior courtyard. So and they wanted a large sculpture. So once I received the request and did the design, I started at the loading dock with my ruler and measured every door and elevator going up to the 6th floor so that I would know that each element of the piece would fit through the doors once they were completed. And then once they were completed, they were bolted together. What I also did, you can see those dark patches because we did the mosaic on sites, and they're stars, and they cover the area where we've put the hardware to bolt the pieces together so that so she stays together. It turns out that worked out very well. We needed to take her apart for a construction project, and then she was able to visit the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee. and actually, she served as a wayfinder for 2 of the mosaics exhibitions that the Society of American Mosaic Artists conference this April had within the museum. They were just lovely. Another project, so I receive, well, I've done 1 or 2 calls. I guess actually my first commission was an open call. More often now I get either selected with a limited call of artists that they're selecting from, or thank God for the internet. So I am an artist that lives in the digital age. People find me there and they invite me just as a singular artist to participate. For this particular project, which was a piece for the governor's resident for the state of Tennessee, a small group of artists were invited to utilize the slate that had come off the building, the governor's residence, during a renovation project. In fact, the contractors were throwing it in the dumpster, and our then First Lady jumped in here and said, "We are not throwing this away." Everyone else used the whole pieces of slate, and I cut mine up and put it in the concrete mixer and tumbled it and came up with these small pieces and selected and sorted out the slate to the colors to come up with the design. And obviously got the commission. So the bird is the idea of, it's titled In the Presence of Presence. The bird is a present because there's a whole grace that occurs both with giving and receiving donations, and this was to honor the donors. Originally, I had proposed it as gold smalty, but they wanted bronze. I agreed and had it gilded, and actually it's my first public bronze, so I was pretty happy. A little bit of process on this. So so you understand how I do the large scale sculptures. If you look in the middle, the gray, those are part of the armature. So for any of my large scale sculptures, there's an armature that takes into account major stress points, but also the installation attachment system. So I have that made and treated for rust resistance, and then we block the foam around it, glue it in. And I used to just start with a big block of foam, but there was too much waste. So now when I'm designing in the design process, I do a very hand mechanical drawing. I tried CAD drawing, it didn't work for me. So I still draw out on graph paper, but I can figure out where I need to put the blocks of foam that are going to give me enough material to do the carving. And I don't always worry about working with things in the direction they need to be. We roll them around in the studio to whatever makes our work as easy as possible. I use a combination of hot tools, which are hot wires that melt the styrofoam, and you can see all the debris. I use a lot of cold tools, which are a series of wire brushes. Almost all of my projects that are large scale, I work with a maquette. I learn a lot from the maquette in designing. It also engages the client when I make a presentation with a maquette. Oftentimes I'm talking about it and talking specifics. Then I give them one of the little pieces and let them pass it around and bond with it. So they fall in love with it in a small size, and then eventually it becomes a big size. But I do all of most of my designing occurs at that point, not only in terms of shape and volume, but also in the coloration of the piece. So that saves me both time and money when I go to the larger scale. I work in a direct method, so there's a lot of back buttering that's going on. And I have another little section coming up. So another project in a cancer healing garden was Metamorphosis. So of course we have all three stages with a combination of faux bois, a butterfly, state butterfly, state flower. I try to build in something that's going to resonate with the community where these pieces go. And for me, I also have to have that challenge. So I wanted to be able to articulate the legs and the proboscis and the antenna. So while I've already was welding, it was a perfect time to take a blacksmith class. Yay. This is another project that I did in a park in Memphis. The tree, yes, it does look a little lollipopish, I admit that, but it was in a park that wasn't, supervised 24/7, and I didn't want the liability of people climbing up and falling down. So, and during this project, I had to deal with a lot of ASTM standards, which are American building standards, and they're playground safety in terms of how close things can be, if there's a certain height. So it's not the pleasant part of what I do. And as a matter of fact, I'm a corporation in the U.S. because they're just so darn litigious over there. And so you have to, being an artist and doing commissions, and just being an artist, you're a small business and you have to pay attention to those kind of things, even though they're not the fun part. So it was a seasonal tree of life, and the tree crown is in quadrants, and there was an adjacent fifth grade, an adjacent elementary school, and all the fifth graders researched animals and living things in the watershed of that. There's a stream in the back, so the watershed area of that park, and created imagery that related to that. And then those drawings were then taken back to my studio and more or less divided in the season that those elements resided. Same with the sculptures. So all of them, okay, so here's my first, they're installed on a concrete pad that's 4 inches below grade, so there's an extension on the sculptures themselves so that the rubber application comes up to the feet and they really appear sitting on the surface as opposed to being buried by it. But this is my largest to date, most complicated, most challenging, most loved and hated project at the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. Some of you may have already heard that name because, of course, Gary Drossel has a whole series of pieces done within the floor. We were both on the same grade, and the hospital dealt with different California ecosystems. So we were at the rocky shore level. So even though he had seals, my seals looked a little bit different at any rate. So this is at the same location. This is what was the final design after about 24 variations over a 5-year period. And this is the finished installation from high up on the hospital. Just to quickly go through a couple of the elements that were designed and constructed. This was the traveling starfish. There was much discussion about the traveling starfish. It ultimately got made in my studio, and then I got to drive it to Wisconsin, because they wanted a fabricator there to create the rocky cove that it leans again, and then I got to go pick it up, and the rocky cove looked more like castle ruins than the rocky cove, so I got to stay in Wisconsin while they redid the rocks, then loaded it in my trailer and took it back to Bell Buckle, and then it got covered in mosaic in my studio in Bell Buckle, not only the top part, but underneath, because it was leaning on the rock, and the rock has a cave in it. So there it is installed. You can see the cave, so the kids, well, not only kids, my project manager loves sitting in there and hiding from people. But you can see here where I've also, I took some time and did several drawings, several days of drawing sessions with pediatric patients, and would explain the project to them and provide them with books and talk to them about the rocky shores. So they did a number of drawings, and the age group was from literally 3 to, well, it was pediatrics, so 3 to 18, and in various levels of health. So I always take that as quite a privilege to be able to do something that will create a legacy for those young souls. So we turned their mosaics, their designs into mosaics and applied them to the inside of the cave. When we started doing that, we started flat on the table, and then I went to pick them up, and I thought, that's not going to go around the cave, because you know what happens when you have your nice spacing on a flat surface and you pick it up and they all close down. So I had to build this structure that was roughly the inside dimensions of the arc of the cave. And so in Bell Buckle, we did the mosaic within this structure, and then took it out to California in that structure. And then we cut it into sections and applied it to the interior of the cave using, I might say, Latticrete 254. Love those ladder. So the only thing more fun than mosaicing in a small cave is doing epoxy grout in a small cave. I love Spectralock Pro. And we even used the Day Glow additive into that. Although I've never seen it in a dark situation, I just hope that there's a little bit of a glow in there. I just haven't had a chance to check on that. So my 2 assistants here, my trusty assistant, Tiffany, and this is her mom. Actually, Tiffany's worked for me for over 25 years, and her mom's worked for me for about 23 years. Janet, this is Janet back here, had 13 children, and over the years, I've had over 28 extended family members assist me in the studio, so that's been my labor force. Fortunately, they like working for me. because I couldn't do what I do without somebody else, and they really are like a second family to me. So my system of doing armatures doesn't work for everything, and this was a system. The next group of slides are for part of the installation that was called Shrimp Ballet, because I wanted to have 3 shrimp that mosaic shrimp that actually rocked. So we realized if we had done the foam interior structure, that would have reamed out in the rocking process. So I worked with another engineer and we came up with this waffle-like construction, and I basically did a GFRC construction, which is metal, well, there was more metal and also fiberglass fibers in concrete around that to do those in concrete, and then working on mosaicing them in various ways. One of my all-time favorite tools in the studio is this hydraulic table that raises things up and down. So we're constantly working at eye level when we're doing the pieces if we can't roll them around. And even though these were smaller, they were a little bit heavier to deal with. But when all was said and done, they did rock and they were great fun. They are great fun. So the exciting thing about this commission that I hadn't experienced before was that a semi-truck had to back up in my driveway to load it all in to take it to California. That in itself was exciting. It took several times of reorganizing to get everything in, because it was very close there at the end. You can see how close the last crate that had the starfish, the traveling starfish in the back there. And then too, we get to we drive it across the U.S. to California. We get there, they're unloading it, and then the traveling starfish gets lifted on a crane so that it can get put in place. And then you can also see there's our form that has the inside mosaic. But they kept saying that I had to come out at a certain date, because if I didn't, I would be holding up construction. They assured me that everything was ready for me to install, and this is what I arrived to. Yeah. Dangerous times. Poor otters almost got run over. So here's the last element that I'm going to show you was the elephant seal slide, because it was a play space. I mean, this was done specifically as a play space. There's Martin, but this is also up on stands, and then it also is going to get covered by some play surface. So it's not quite that big. It looks more impressive with Martin standing there looking up. This was the biggest design challenge of any artwork that I've ever made. It's made in 5 parts, and because, one, I don't have the equipment in my studio to work on something this large as a monolithic form. So I had to break it into parts so that we would be able to work on it and move it around and get to it as easily as possible. I still would have to call the Cataldo family, back to Janet and Tiffany. She has a lot of brothers, and they run a car shop. So I would fix them lunch, and they'd come over and they'd help me take it apart and put it together and take it apart and put it together. So I fixed many lunches during this project. So like Lizzie, we utilized the bolting together system on the pieces. The 5 pieces were the basic platform, and then the 2 sides. There's stairs up the front, and then the head went on as a final unit. 6 pieces if you count the slide. This was how we, once the threaded rod was cut to length, we'd make a little core out of styrofoam, and then I'd make a concrete plug, and then we'd make a little unit that would just fit over that so that we could put it together on site and again do that final mosaic for the connecting system. And there's Janet and Tiffany helping me do the final mosaic around where the head got placed on top. And there's the elephant seal with some of the designs from the patients on there. The black is a base rubber for the rubber surface that was designed. I also designed the graphic for the whole space. And there he is, very early the last morning I was there. Oh, I'm sorry, bear with me with otters. Okay, I love otters. This is the maquette, so I always create a maquette that's 1 inch to 1 foot. and then I do my painting on there, which informs the tile selection, as well as even the tile placement or the shape of tile. I start with an 8-inch tile and do either through nipping or sawing, create the shapes that I want of the tile. So it could be strips, it could be what we call interesting shapes. But every edge of every cut tile, every nip tile has been hand sanded so that it's very smooth, because these are interactive pieces, and I really don't want anyone to bleed from them. Here's a shot of my studio in the carving process. I'm working with my maquettes at all times, so by the end of the project, the maquettes are a little chipped and dirty. Here's a shot that shows the process of concreting. So this is the first layer of concrete I put on every piece. This is a slurry. This is the tree before it went to that other park project in the background. This is the first coat on there. Once we have pieces covered in two special layers of concrete and mesh, I do a lot of drawing and color coding. I don't have an algorithm. I do what we call mosaic by numbers. So there'll be a number of colors within one thing so that I create the richness of the fur and transition those colors and draw different types of cues on the pieces so my assistants know where to go with it. This is a shot of the first pour. They do the design as a very thin layer over top of the black base coat layer. And then, of course, this is the finished piece. I had to put Bob in here because my dad loved pelicans, and when they finally approved the pelican piece, I had to name the pelican Bob. So this is after my dad. And there's the whole piece. And all in all, I mean, even with all its challenge, I learned so much on that project. I'm so grateful for it. For each of these projects, I've learned something. But every time I do get a project, I try to build something in that's also going to add to my own practice, own layer of interest. Through no design, I've made more animals than I ever anticipated. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm glad to have the projects. But I want to thank you again for inviting me here to be part of your forum. And I have one wish that I always pass on, that I want you to make your dreams concrete. Thank you very much.